right, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I lost my presentation. You guys can see my presentation, correct?
Mhm.
You can see it. Okay, perfect. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. This is Aparo's Nonprofit Bites and Insights. These are our free webinar series that we have tailored specifically for nonprofit professionals. Today, we are focusing on how to choose the right CPA or financial professional for your nonprofit. We have the very knowledgeable Stephen Newland with us from MoneyPath, who's going to be leading this conversation. But before I turn it over to him, let's go over some housekeeping items. So we are recording this webinar, and the recording link will be shared with you in the follow-up email. All of you who are attending live will not only receive the recording link, you'll also receive the copy of the slide decks and other resources we might talk about today. Chat and Q&A box are available for you to use. Feel free to drop in your questions or comments at any time throughout our presentation. For those of you who are new to Aparo, welcome. Really quickly, we are a nonprofit ourselves. We are based in Charlotte, North Carolina. And basically what we do is we help other nonprofits with any other technology question, needs, or challenges. So we offer a wide range of services to help meet the needs of the nonprofits. So if you're looking for just a quick check-in, a quick one-on-one, we do that. All the way to the other end where we help nonprofits go through a project to find a solution that is tailored to their nonprofit needs. I do want to quickly mention, I know that we're not in a cybersecurity workshop right now, but I do want to share that we have a cybersecurity educational cohort that is open for applications. Wanted to mention that because we do have an info session to learn more about that program on Monday. In a moment, I will drop the links in the chat so you can dig into it a little bit more. But this is a great opportunity. It's free of cost to you, being sponsored by Bank of America. But if you are in a position where you want to know where your nonprofit as it is at in terms of their security posture, again, this is just a great opportunity to learn more. So I'll drop that in the chat in a moment. And then finally, these are the ways to connect with us. If or when you'd like to access services with Aparo, best way, go to our website, aparo.org/nonprofits and submit a request. And then if you haven't already, consider subscribing to our email list so you can stay posted on our programs. All right, well, that is it for me. Go ahead and stop sharing and turn it over to Steven.
Awesome. Well, let me get my slides set up here. Give me just a second. Make sure everybody can you see my slide deck?
We're seeing your presentation,
Oh no.
presenter. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
While you're figuring that out, I do have someone raising their hand. Just a moment.
Here we go.
Um, Sadrak, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong. Did you have a question? Did you have a quick question? Oh, was it an error? Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to mute you again
Mhm.
and go ahead, Stephen.
Perfect. Can you see the deck now?
Yes. Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, very good. Well, before I even jump in, just a quick plug for Aparo. I'm actually working with a nonprofit now, and I've been on weekly meetings as a part of the Aparo process. So it's a really great service, and that's just my little plug for Aparo. They do amazing, amazing work. So yes, so check it out. Um, Before I jump into, I'd love to give a quick, uh, overview of myself. Stephen Newland. I'm located just outside of Atlanta. Currently, I'm an owner of MoneyPath. So it's an organization I started is about a year and a half or so ago, focused on providing fractional CFO and financial planning and analysis services for nonprofits and mission-driven businesses. And so obviously finding the right financial professional is really something that is really, really important to me. So I'm excited to share a little bit more today. Yeah, a couple other quick little things. I'm originally from Cincinnati, Ohio, but now, like I said, I live in Atlanta. I love it here. I'm a big sports fan and I love coffee. So if you see me take a sip, I got my coffee. I'm still drinking my morning coffee over here. So no judgment. I'm still getting through that first cup this morning. So with that being said, we'll go ahead and kick it off. Um, and also, again, please ask questions in the chat as they come up. I like to be very informal. So if you have questions, we'll have a Q&A section at the end too, but feel free just to drop any question in and then, between slides, we'll try to answer as many as we can. So here's what I want to cover today. The three big takeaways is which financial professionals do you need for your organization? Questions to ask if you're hiring a tax or accounting professional. And in reality, a lot of the questions that I'm going to give you today, you can actually ask this if you're hiring a grant professional, or really any professional services organization. These are great questions to ask. And what I would say too is Aparo answers all these questions in the positive. So, and then number three is, should I start looking for a new option when it comes to a CPA or an accountant? So those are what we're going to cover today. All right. So what are the different types of financial professionals for growing organizations? A common thing is, oh, I just need a CPA or I just need a bookkeeper and I'm good to go. But I wanted to break down the three different kind of big buckets or big types of financial professionals. There are certainly others, and especially as you get into larger organizations, there will be more types of financial professionals. But I would say this is really geared towards that nonprofit that is anywhere from zero to probably up to about $5 or so million. As I would say, this is kind of the sweet spot. You've got a bookkeeper, right? And their main role is to maintain accurate financial data. Um, and a lot of organizations actually overlook how critical this role is. Without accurate financial data, you can't do a whole lot else strategically with your financial information. So don't overlook bookkeeping. It is such a critical foundation to your organization. And I promise I have seen so many messes after the fact. It's way easier to just have a good bookkeeper up front and have really good financial data up front than it is to clean it up after. But essentially, every organization has one, right? And for your organization, it might be your treasurer, it might be your friend's wife or husband who has a bookkeeping business on the side. You might do it as the executive director. You might say, "Yeah, I wear all the hats, including bookkeeper." But reality is, every organization essentially has some version of a bookkeeper. An accountant. So, what does an accountant do? An accountant performs financial reviews or audits. They prepare your Form 990. They ensure your tax compliance. They also make sure your organization is falls under what we would call generally accepted accounting principles. So, making sure that what the bookkeeper is putting in there is correct according to the accounting rules, in your jurisdiction. Uh, for most organizations, you've got some interaction with an accountant. So the most common one is going to be they're filling out your Form 990 every year. Obviously, as you get more complicated, or as you continue to grow as an organization, and your organization gets more complicated, you'll move into needing a financial review or even an audit. I'm here in Georgia, so for example, in Georgia, at $500,000 in revenue, you have to get a financial review as a nonprofit. And then at $1 million in revenue, you need to get an audit. And that's where you start to kind of have a deeper engagement with an accountant. And then the CFO role, this is kind of more where I tend to live. This is where they oversee the bookkeeper and the accountant. You're working very closely with both of them, on deadlines and making sure the books are accurate. They also manage cash flow. So they manage the forecast for your organization. They prepare budgets. They're also taking the financial performance of the organization, reporting on that, and providing strategic advice back to leadership. And one that I will just kind of highlight is probably the most critical element of this more strategic finance role is communicating clearly with leadership and the board. This role in particular is able to digest, kind of the accounting lingo and the bookkeeping lingo and all that stuff and say, okay, but what does this mean for the organization? And how do we communicate this very simply and very clearly? My experience has been typically for like a financial leadership type role, a lot of organizations do start to look at this as they get closer to that $1 million mark or $750,000 in revenue up to about 5 million. And then after that, typically they're able to bring somebody in-house to do that full time. So yeah, so those are kind of the overview of the three big buckets of financial professionals. What I would say today is the focus is going to be on bookkeepers and accountants. But again, as I mentioned, the things that I'm going to share today apply to really any financial professional or any professional service organization. Um,
Then before you move forward, we do have a
yeah.
question around, so the treasurer on the board, where do they fit in this area?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say they're kind of overseeing everything. So they're acting as the governance seat for the organization in the finance role. So their role is to make sure that essentially all these pieces are coming together, and they're thinking about maybe the longer term viewpoint of the organization and just making sure everything is compliant. So usually the treasurer will fill that kind of CFO role in my experience up until about that $1 million mark. And then typically your treasurer will step more into a very strategic thinking type role after that, just because there's a lot more day-to-day uh, tasks that need to be done. Like oftentimes your treasurer at about that $1 million mark isn't like in the spreadsheets and managing your forecasts and preparing budget reports and things like that. It's a great question. All right. So I want to tell you a little bit of a story. This was April 15th, and this was my personal taxes. So this was April 15th, a few years ago, and it's 4 o'clock. I get a call from my CPA, and they say, "Hey, we're not going to be able to file your tax return on time." And I said, "Thanks for letting me know. I kind of assumed that at this point. But I appreciate you letting me know." What had happened prior to that was several weeks of calls or text messages with virtually no response. And so this was after multiple attempts to get in touch. And this was just a, hey, by the way, we're not going to meet the deadline. And so that's just one example. But I've also encountered and seen other examples. And so what I'm sharing today, I've experienced personally, and having that thought of, man, there's got to be a better way, or maybe um, a better option out there. So I'm curious if anyone has had a poor experience with financial professional. If you maybe type yes in the chat, or if you're willing to share like a sentence or so about it. I'd be really curious if anybody else has experienced anything similar, and I'll move on to the next slide while you're typing. Um, all right. So moving on to the next slide, I want to kind of cover a few things first, and then I'll jump into some of the questions to start asking. So choosing the right tax and accounting professional can be overwhelming, especially if this is maybe your first time doing this for your organization. So maybe you're in the camp of maybe you've had a bad experience and you just say, I don't want to do that again. This is around the time of year for nonprofits that first deadline for the Form 990 is coming up. So maybe you're right in the middle of a tough experience this year with your CPA, or again, maybe this is your first time. What I want to present today is for the next time you hire somebody, I want to give you a set of questions that will help set realistic expectations. What I have seen is typically when there's frustration when hiring a financial professional, it's typically because there's on one side over here, the client or the organization has a certain set of expectations. And then on the other side, the firm has a certain set of expectations that the client is just going to slide right in and be like all the other clients. And so oftentimes, there's a quick sales call, and then there's a lot of stuff in the middle here that there's just assumptions, and we all know what happens when we assume, right? It's never usually good. And so a lot of the questions I'm going to give you today are questions to help um, essentially interview the people that you're gonna hire to a very critical role for your organization, even if it's just even if it's just a CPA that you're hiring to do one project, your Form 990 every year. It's still really, really important to ask these questions. Um, the benefit that I have is I've been on both sides of the equation here. So I have worked inside previously for another company where that provided bookkeeping and tax work. And I've also had the benefit of being on the other side where I've used a lot of these types of companies. And I've worked with probably over a dozen different bookkeepers and probably half a dozen different CPA firms, maybe a dozen actually now, CPAs and CPA firms. So I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly, and a lot of the questions that I'll give you today will help kind of weed out. I think the will prevent maybe bad experiences. So, with all that being said, I'd love to start jumping into those questions. So the first one, this is going to be evaluating their experience. So, the first question here are a list of three questions you can ask. The first one is, what experience do you have working with nonprofits of our size and or mission area? What I would say here is size is going to be more important, I believe, than mission area. The reason is just because with size, there's a lot of different stuff that comes with, for example, like a $500,000 organization or a $2 million organization. They experience very different things from, let's say, like a $10 million organization. And so having a financial professional or CPA who is familiar with your size and has other clients that are working with your size, it really, really comes in handy because there's just different things that those different sizes that your organization is experiencing. Mission area, I would say, is important, but it's not super critical. And I say that because even personally at previous firms, I've worked with different industries that I had never had exposure to, and in these firms are used to working with a lot of different industries, so they're usually pretty good about getting up to speed pretty quick. And I'd say for the most part with finance and accounting stuff, um, probably 90 to 95% of it is pretty similar across industries. It's just that last 5 to 10% that is, maybe specialized. What I will say is more important though is I would recommend finding somebody and asking them what their experience is with nonprofit. So if they don't have any nonprofit experience and they've just done companies, that is kind of a yellow flag that I would just raise, kind of keep that in the back of your mind, just because there are quite a number of differences between nonprofit accounting and for-profit accounting. So um, that's the first question. The second one is, how familiar are you with restricted versus unrestricted funds, Form 990s, or grant compliance? This is just another kind of question below the surface that you can just get a better understanding of how familiar are they really with nonprofit accounting and accounting issues. These are all great questions to ask when you're on that sales call with them, or you're just kind of exploring, working with another firm. The last question in this section is, ask what continuing education their team does to stay up to date on nonprofit accounting changes. Again, for profit, a lot of for-profit accounting, continuing educations will work, but if they're, prioritizing nonprofit continuing education, that's something you really want to know because that's going to be the firm you want in your corner. All right. The next question is, are we there yet? And this is one I would say that causes some of the most frustration. And this is about turnaround time. So one of the first questions I love to ask, when hiring a new organization, a new firm, is, what is your typical turnaround organization, or sorry, turnaround time for organizations like ours? So, for example, do you need your 990 filed by May 15th, or are you okay, pushing that, delaying that, and filing an extension for the November 15th deadline? Just asking them ahead of time, what is their typical turnaround time? So if you give them all the files that they need, are they going to be able to turn your tax form around in 30 days? Is it going to take 60 days, 90 days? What does that look like for them? So just asking that question ahead of time. And then the second one is, how often do you file extensions for Form 990 clients? Um, the reason that's important is because I have seen at other firms this where they'll just kind of kick the can down the road for nonprofit clients, and they'll say, "Well, we're going to prioritize our for-profit clients, even though their deadline is typically April 15th." But I've seen it where they just kind of automatically file extensions for all nonprofit clients. Why that might be important to know is because if that's how they're thinking about your organization, that just tells you you might not be at the top of the priority list. But as you know, if you've applied for any grants, having that latest 990 information to be able to send to for grant applications, that's a win, right? And so if you're consistently applying to grants and you have that information, you know, by May 15th every year that you can start including on your grant applications, that just signals to the grant app, the grants that you're applying for that, wow, they've got, they met they met the first deadline of the year, they've got their stuff together. It just is a good signal to them. It doesn't hurt in that process. So, the other thing is, the other question to ask if you're looking at bookkeepers is what day of the month can I expect my books to be done? Um, so I'll give you a little bit of behind the scenes on some of this. What I would say is many firms operate on very tight deadlines. So you can imagine, they've got 30, 40, 50, however many other organizations that they all have the same deadline. They're either maybe trying to do an audit, they're trying to do the Form 990. And so they have a lot of different requests and a lot of different questions and a lot of stuff coming in, at them at the same time. Now they signed up for this, a lot of they understand what they're getting into these first few months of the year. And so it's not don't just assume that don't hesitate to nudge them. I guess is what I'm trying to say. Even the best ones, you might have to nudge a little bit just because think about it from their perspective. They've got so many different things coming in. And so you may from time to time need to nudge them a little bit. Now, I think the exceptional ones will guide you through the process and over communicate. But my experience is they are far and few between. And so just for a lot of them, you're going to have to just to nudge them a little bit. And so that's just something to keep in mind about turnaround times, trying to set expectations, realistic expectations. The other thing I'll tell you from behind the scenes is, and it's a little unfortunate, but I've seen it to be true, is sometimes the clients that do make a little bit of noise are the ones that the CPAs, again, this is not true of every firm, this is a generalization, but will prioritize just because they're a little bit of a headache. It's kind of like, okay, I'm tired of getting these questions. I'm tired of getting these emails. I'm just going to knock this one out and get it, kind of get it across the finish line. But again, don't be hesitant to nudge a little bit. But asking these questions about turnaround time, really, really important. You'll get an idea of whether your organization will be a priority or kind of an afterthought to these firms. Okay, so moving on, what's Google say? So we all know the benefit of living in the internet age is we've got access to every other person who has taken the time to leave a Google review. Um, what I would say to this is Google reviews and testimonials can provide really valuable insights, especially when it comes to a CPA's competence and client service. But what I would say is don't skim the ratings. Read a mix of good and bad reviews. Don't just look for what you want to see. Read the 5 stars, but then read the 1 star reviews too, if they have any. Um, the other thing to look for in these reviews is pay attention to any reviews that reference either response times, accuracy, or professionalism. And not all these are necessarily red flags, and I'll get into kind of how to use these in a minute. But I would say if you see any concerns about accuracy or professionalism, I would consider those pretty strong yellow flags, but don't automatically disqualify them. Um, Here's why. The next one is if everything else checks out, and except for the reviews. What I love to do is when I get on the call is I like to just ask them about that review and say, hey, I saw this review out there. Here's what they said. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? And what you're gonna get from that answer is you're gonna see whether they get really, really defensive or whether they say, yeah, you know what, hand up, our firm made a mistake on that client. But we'll start to tell you a little bit more about just how that firm, is thinking about their clients. Um, the other thing to, you know, ask the most common reason for clients leaving their firm. I love this question because it kind of tells you whether they know where their blind spots are or not. But it also tells you if they're willing to be vulnerable and just be honest with you. And if they're honest about that, then that's something again, the whole point of these questions is just to get everything on the table early so that you're not disappointed and frustrated when you go to start working towards that Form 990 deadline later on. And so just ask them, what's the most common reason for clients leaving the firm? It's a really, really good question that can open up a lot of insights. All right, this might be the hardest of the ones to ask, but this is where we turn the mirror back on ourselves. The reality is sometimes it's not them, it's us. The reality is um, a lot of times these organizations they have a lot of different information coming into them, right? So the firms, the CPA firms, and so they can only work as efficiently as the information that you give them. And so the two questions I like to turn around and ask for ourselves is, are you providing the necessary information up front, or are they having to come back to you multiple times and say, hey, I don't have this, can you provide this? And then do they have to follow up again? Or are your financial records scattered or are they really well organized? So imagine, put yourself in the shoes of the the firm. If you were them, which customer would you try to prioritize? Right. And we talked about the ones that make the most noise before, but I would say a close second, if not even above them, would be the customers who are very well organized. They respond quickly to requests. CPA firms love to work with these organizations because you're making their life way easier, and so they want to help return the favor to you. So that's just something else to keep in mind. If your records are scattered or they're having to constantly come back and clarify things and ask for more information, that could be a sign that it's not necessarily a bad CPA, but it could be a sign that look internally to see, hey, maybe there's some processes and maybe there's some things that we need to clean up on our side. So, just something to kind of turn the mirror back around and look at ourselves a little bit. One of my favorite questions, I didn't put it on the slide, but one of my favorite questions to ask when I first start with a new CPA, and I don't think I did this in my most recent one that I started working with another nonprofit, but I love to ask them up front, what can I do as a client to make your life easier? You want to get on their good side? That's a fantastic question to ask. I think a lot of times they'll say, please just respond timely. Please, be organized. And if you do those couple things, you're going to make their life easier. But ask them, they will love that because CPAs, they're used to getting people angry at them. They take a lot of the brunt of bad news. They have to tell people, oh, we're gonna miss the deadline, or no one really loves interacting with their CPA, right? And so it's not, they if you are thinking about them, I promise that they'll return the favor. And one of the last sections here, this is about communication. Um, you should feel comfortable communicating with your CPA. I've experienced in the past where I have been uncomfortable communicating directly with my CPA, whether it's because of kind of a tone that they took over the phone or an email where it felt like I was bothering them by asking a question or bugging them. You're hiring them. Their work for you at the end of the day, right? And so you should feel comfortable communicating with your CPA, like bottom line. So, a couple ways to bridge that gap again early on instead of being frustrated later is asking the questions, are they available by email, phone, or video? And does that align with your preference? One example of this is I was constantly going back and forth over email about a couple questions, and we just couldn't. I would email, and then it would take 3 or 4 business days to get a response. I'd email back, and we just kept going in this cycle. I offered several times, and at the end of all those back and forth emails, I said, "Can we just get on a call?" And that request was often ignored, until flat out I just stopped responding to the questions, and I said, "We need to get on a call. I can't. We're going in circles." Um, and so, again, ask them up front. They might say, yeah, we only communicate by email or phone. We don't do video calls. So, just understand, what is your preference? Do you want somebody to just sit down with you and say, hey, when my tax or my Form 990 is done, can you just walk me through it? And if you just ask them that up front, a lot of times they'll say, sure. Or they'll kind of build that into your agreement with them. But just understand, what is your preference, and what do they prefer. The other thing, this is really important. Do they explain things in plain language, or are they using like fancy accounting jargon? Um, at the end of the day, as the organization's leader, you're signing that tax form, you're signing that Form 990. And so you have to understand what's in there. And so if they're not communicating it clearly and effectively to you, and they're using big words, or they're not explaining things correctly, that's kind of a red flag for me. Again, it's just because you need to understand what's in there. And a lot of times I can speak to this, like being in the finance world, us finance and accounting people, we don't do a great job at bridging that gap between the knowledge that we have in the specialized area and people who aren't living in the finance world every single day. We just kind of assume people should know what the terms are, which is not always a good thing. The third bullet point here is asking them, are they proactive in offering advice, or are they only going to respond directly to the questions that you ask? At the end of the day, you want your CPA, your tax professional, your bookkeeper, you want them to be a partner. They're a partner for your organization. And so, you're hiring them because they are specialized with a certain skill. They've got a viewpoint on finance and accounting that maybe you don't have. And so you want them to raise things to you that might be blind spots. So if they see something, wrong on the Form 990 that maybe you had provided them, you want them to say, hey, this doesn't quite look right to me. So asking them ahead of time, hey, how proactive are you? If you see issues, or if you see red flags, will your firm call that out to me? So just asking them a little bit to dive a little bit into that, and maybe give an example of how they've done that for other clients, is a really, really good place to start. Um, I've kind of already hit on this, but a good tax and accounting professional, they should feel like a partner for your organization. It's not always cheap to hire someone like this to do the Form 990 or to be a partner for your organization, and so they should feel like a partner for you.
Stephen, we got a
Yeah.
two-part question around kind of a role clarification. Is this a good time?
Yeah.
Okay. So a bit of a background. We have someone running a nonprofit in Ghana, which they registered in August 2024. As part of registering nonprofits in Ghana, it's required to attach a letter from an auditing firm or a
Mhm.
chartered accountant. So the first question is, as someone with little knowledge about finance and auditing, can you please explain the role of the auditing firm or the chartered accountant's role in our organization?
Interesting. I'm not as familiar. Obviously, I don't have any experience with Ghana and kind of the requirements there. Um, Maybe one more clarifying question. This was a brand new nonprofit, it had just started
Started in 2020, in August 2024.
August 2024. Okay. My So typically, I'm just speaking United States here. A financial audit is typically done, when there's a decent amount of activity, maybe 500,000 to $1 million of activity for an organization, and then they audit the financials. Maybe what you're referring to is, I don't know if maybe the accountant over there, an accountant needs to confirm the status of the organization, that it is truly like a confirmed nonprofit status. And so that could be maybe what that's referring to. I'd have to dig in a little bit more. Be happy to look at it if you want to send me an email offline, but I'm just not as familiar with it, with the different rules and regulations over there.
And the second question is, do we decide to hire an accountant for interval financial activities when we have the funds and still work with the auditing firm for auditing purposes?
Hmm. Um, Yeah, why don't and this was related to the organization in
Yes,
Ghana. Yeah,
correct.
let's I'd be happy to if you want to email me, let's talk a little offline on that just so I can have the full context just to better understand. I just don't want to give you a wrong answer here.
Perfect. Sounds good. We'll do that. We did have a third question come through. How much should the CPA know about tax strategies, or will an EA be just as good as a CPA?
Yeah, really good question. I actually love that question. I'm so glad you brought it up. Um, so I will reference I would call him a mentor of mine. He done fractional CFO work for churches and nonprofits for a number of years. I remember him telling me one time, he said, I've worked with probably 30 different CPAs in my career. And these are his words. He said, I can remember maybe a handful I would say were really, really great. His point in saying that was the letters after name are just a certification. That means yes, they've passed some level of test, um, and produce a certain level of knowledge, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they will be the best option. I also know of some really great EAs, and that's enrolled agent. If you're not familiar with the term, to get the enrolled agent, it's not as cumbersome as a process as the CPA. But a lot of times they are just as knowledgeable and have just as much experience as a CPA. And so, no, I don't think it necessarily has to be a CPA. But I think all these questions would still apply to them. And if they kind of pass this test, some of these questions, and you've heard that they've worked well with other nonprofits, I don't think there's a big issue there. In terms of tax strategy, with nonprofits, it's a little tricky. I mean, with the Form 990, a lot of times you just need to it's an informational document, where you're just reporting the activity of an organization versus like having to pay any tax unless you have certain like earned income activities and things at your nonprofit. But yes, I mean, if you have a more complicated structure and you need tax strategy, yeah, I mean, I would look for someone with that skill set for sure. Any other questions for me?
That's it.
Okay. So should I make a change? Here are just a couple quick questions that at least how I filter it of how when it's time to make a change. If they are unprofessional in your interactions, it's time for a change. Like I said before, you're hiring them. You are their client, and so they should do everything they can to show that they appreciate your business. And if they're unprofessional in their interactions, that's just something that for me is kind of there's a lot of other options out there, and your organization and the mission that you do is too important to have someone who is acting unprofessionally in your corner. So if you found errors or issues, there's most people would say, well, I'm going to just change firms right out of the gate. A lot of times that is probably a good solution, but another solution is asking for another person at the firm to work on it. Sometimes, especially given the size of your organization, if you're a smaller organization, a lot of accounting firms will put a more junior person on your account for that season. Obviously, it's always reviewed typically by a senior level, more senior level person. But if you found errors or issues, ask for another person or consider making a change if it's a smaller firm. If turnaround times are slow, this is back to that other slide that we were talking about, turning the mirror around. Ask if this is due to organization on your side, or if it's just is it just purely bad communication from the CPA? But what I like about this is if you ask them, hey, I know we missed our deadline, or hey, this has taken a really long time. Is there something I could do differently better or differently next time? Is there something I could do better to make your life a little easier? Asking this question kind of disarms it a little bit, and you're just trying to help. You're trying to figure out a solution. Um, if they come back and say like there's really nothing else that you could have done differently, then that might be a sign to make a change. It signals that your organization is not a priority for that firm. So or they just are understaffed, which is actually becoming a very real concern kind of in the CPA field right now. So the last one here is if you feel like your organization doesn't have a trusted tax/accounting partner, make a change. I wish there was a better term for this. This is kind of like the vibe feel. If you just feel like they're not a partner and you're not getting, that you're just not getting what you need, you feel like maybe there's a better option out there, then it doesn't hurt. You can always go interview. And I like to use the word interview. You can always go interview a couple other firms and just see. It doesn't hurt. It's not like, there's no, you can ultimately say, you know what, I've interviewed two or three other firms and I've decided what I've got is maybe worth sticking with. Or you might find, yeah, there's a really great other partner on the other side here that I could work with. And I want to kind of tie all this together because I think it can get lost in the weeds a little bit. Finding the right tax and accounting professional plays a big part to having financial clarity. So, speaking from more of that fractional CFO, financial planning and analysis seat, if you don't have good bookkeeping, accounting, and tax professionals in place, it makes all the strategic stuff way harder. And at the end of the day, if you can use your organizations that use their financial information uh, to make their organization better and use it, as part of developing their long-term strategy and developing financial sustainability. Organizations that do that right are the ones that last long term. And so don't overlook having the right professionals in place because it really makes a big difference in being able to use your financial information to make your organization better. And at the end of the day, if you've got strong financial information and a strong financial team, it's going to lead to more impact, less stress, and better decisions. I've been around enough executive directors to know that, just leadership at nonprofits, you carry a lot. It's and oftentimes this what you do is deeply, deeply personal. And so finance and accounting shouldn't be one of those things that's added to your stress list. Having the right professional should reduce your stress and actually be a net positive for the organization and providing insight and strategic guidance to make the organization more financially sustainable for the long term. And that wraps it up today. I wanted to take a quick minute. I do post on LinkedIn. I post nonprofit finance tips, usually about 3 times a week, and I've got a weekly newsletter as well. So if you'd like to add me on LinkedIn, I'd love to have you over there. You can do the QR code or my website's down there at the bottom. And yeah, I'd be happy to help answer any questions, or if you even just had a question like, hey, here's been my experience with my CPA. What do you think? Should I look in another direction? I'm always happy to help answer that. So feel free to send me a DM. Be happy to help provide any guidance I can. And I'd love to move into any other Q&A.
And if you'd like to share now, we got a bit of time, and if it's easier to kind of verbalize, feel free to raise your hand, and I can unmute you so you can share your story and your question. But while you're doing that, I'm dropping a couple links in the chat. There is a webinar survey. Please take a moment and let us know what you think of the webinar. Fortunately, Stephen, this isn't the last time we'll see him. He will be coming back in July, at the end of July, for another session around nonprofit finance, so stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, there is a Collaborate with Confidence in Microsoft Teams webinar that we are doing on May 22nd. So if you are a Microsoft user and you'd like to learn more about Teams, make sure you sign up for that. So we did have another question come through. What are typical monthly costs for CPA SVCS? It's a lot of acronyms.
Yeah, good question. My my first answer will say it depends, but a lot of it depends on just the size and scope. Um, so is it Nalo? Uh, if you have I don't know if you can drop kind of a rough idea of, annual revenue for your organization, but if so, I can kind of give you a better idea. I know what I can tell you for filing like a Form 990, I've seen it anywhere from about $1,000, maybe $1,200. Yep. Okay. Two. So I've seen it anywhere, and this is for about like $100,000 organization. It was around $1,200 to file the Form 990. And then for an organization, in a couple $1 million range, I've seen it anywhere between 3 to 5K, and that's just for the 990. Again, these can vary quite a bit at other firms, but that gives you a reasonable range, and that's usually just to prep and file the 990. If you're doing a review and an audit, those definitely get a little bit more pricey. So an audit can be anywhere between $10,000 to $15,000. And again, I'm kind of speaking in this like under $5 million range. And then a review can be maybe half of the price of an audit.
So another question, do you have any advice for how to stop working with a CPA or bookkeeper? What you should say to end the collaboration?
Yeah, great question. It's always awkward, can be awkward. I think my first instinct, and actually was just talking to somebody a few months ago about this who was really looking to move in another direction. So my first pushback to them was, um, uh, do you feel like they have adequate processes in place? Is it just you're just not you don't mesh together, they don't understand your organization, or is it just truly like they don't have the skill set? Um, I would say if you don't feel like they have the skill set and you're not getting the raw, services that you need, um, I would just be as honest as you can and say, look, we're just not getting the service level that we need right now. We're growing, this has become a pain point. It's taken a lot of our, leadership's time away from other important things. We just need to move in a different direction. I'd be happy to provide feedback, but we feel confident that we need to move in another direction. I think that's a very respectful way to do it. Um, if if you haven't had any of that feedback yet, if you haven't given that feedback and you're just kind of struggling in silence, I would say maybe there's a better term for that. But if you're just, kind of frustrated without having provided some of that feedback, have I would just sit down and be completely honest and just say, hey, look, we're spending a lot more time trying to answer questions or just feeling like we're not getting the service that we need. Here are our frustrations. How can we solve this? We want to work together with you. We want to try to solve, we want to try to solve this, figure this gap out. What do you think? What are some ideas that you think we could, fix moving forward? I think either one of those approaches is a good approach. And it's uncomfortable at the time, but communicating clearly is a gift to them as well.
I like that. Are bookkeeping services based on the number of transactions or annual budget?
I've seen both. Different firms will charge different for different models. So it just depends. What I tend to look for with bookkeeping is something that doesn't fluctuate month to month. Um, I like to be able to have something predictable, and I feel like annual budget is a little bit more predictable because let's just say, for example, let's say you have like a golf tournament or a gala, right? You're going to have 2 months of the year, a couple months of the year where you have, way more transactions. So is that bookkeeper going to just give you an average? Are they going to price you, for that month and charge you more that month? I find annual budget is probably a cleaner way to go. But But finding one that can do a flat fee, I think is the way to go instead of getting surprised, in May when you have your golf tournament and like, why am I charged double this month for my bookkeeping? So,
Great questions. What other platforms are available that are cheaper than QuickBooks?
mhm. Couple other ones. So I don't know about cheaper. I'd have to go dig in. But actually, let me give you this. QuickBooks for nonprofits is actually free. I believe it's free through TechSoup. Maybe depending on the certain level. I think it gives you a pretty high level of service. The QuickBooks, I forget the tier level, but you should be able to get it free through TechSoup. So if that's not something that you're familiar with, check it out. Zero is another pretty common option. Zoho Books is another one. Um, my the gold standard is QuickBooks in my mind. I think you'll find working with QuickBooks is probably the easiest option because if you're using other software or CRMs or other, payroll tools, a lot of tools will integrate directly with QuickBooks, whereas some of these other ones, they're catching up, but I don't think they're quite there yet. Um, you did mention too, I want to give a quick little plug. I got something on my website, so you can see the link there on the slide. If you click on I shouldn't even said that. Now I don't know what you have to click on, but if you go on the top of my website, I think it's free resources. There's a drop down to I have a list of over 150 different nonprofit discounts from various technology vendors, and there's a link where for each of the vendor you can see the discount, and there's a link to where you can go right to the website and see all the information about it. So check that out too. You might find some other tools that you're using on there that also have some discounts available for nonprofits. There's surprisingly there are a ton of software vendors out there. Thank you. Yeah. There are a ton of software vendors out there that offer, even if it's like a 15-20% discount, but there's also a lot that offer free options for nonprofits. There you go. You found it. Yep.
Yeah, that's amazing. Wow, this is a great resource. And it's not even, it's accounting and finance, but also CRMs, communications, cybersecurity, email marketing.
Yeah.
I didn't know there were so many email marketing tools.
There's a
This is
lot.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Wow, I could
There's a
just
lot.
steal this off of you.
Feel free. Yeah, I tried to put together the most comprehensive one I could find out there. So there are a handful out there, and I tried to piece together the biggest list I could find. So
That's great. Yeah, you guys need to check it out if you haven't already. It's amazing. Um, all right. Any other questions?
I'm gonna drop my email here in the chat. Please, if you have any questions or if you just want any more clarification on anything I talked about today, it's Stephen, Stephen at moneypathfpa.com. I'm happy to be a resource. I'm happy to help.
Yes, thanks for dropping that in. You actually dropped it in host and panelist. Let me give it to
Oh,
everyone.
yep.
You're okay. But particularly, I want to shout out to, again, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing, but Shadrach. If you want to continue having that conversation with Stephen around your issue, go ahead and reach out to him. For everyone else, thank you so much for your engagement, for your attendance today. This was an amazing conversation. Stephen, thank you so much. And again, shout out to you for coming back in July. If you drop in the survey any other topics you'd like Stephen to cover, please make sure you do that. I'll be sure to share that with him as we come up with topics for that second session. I think that's it. So expect the follow-up email from me. It'll include a link to recording, the resources that Stephen provided, as well as a copy of the slide deck. And feel free to reply to me if you do have any additional questions or need additional support. All right, everyone, have a great rest of your day and hope to see you later. Thanks, Stephen.
Bye bye.